Good afternoon and welcome to this week's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide advice and share knowledge on key business topics and specialist areas. Joining me today is BizSmart Select member Jill Hutchinson from Aardvark Marketing Consultants. And in today's webinar, Jill will focus on getting the most out of our creative agencies. Before we start our webinar, can I ask you all to post any questions that you may have for Jill using your question mark function on your screen, and Jill will answer them all at the end of the session. Okay, Jill, thank you very much, and over to you.
Morning everyone, my name's Jill Hutchinson from Aardvark Marketing, and I'm going to give you some ideas about how you might be able to get some better work out of your creatives. So before we start, you might want to grab a pen and paper and make some notes. I'm going to pause in a couple of sections and ask you to think about things before I go on. And a little word about jargon. This talk will be applicable whatever outside help you get in your business. So we talk about PR agencies, we talk about creatives, we talk about website and SEO agencies, but it might be other people you work with, other outsiders, who really need to understand what you want to do for your business in order to be able to help you to the best of their ability. So if I talk jargon and I'm using words that you don't normally associate with your business, please don't worry. It's just a different word for the same thing, getting an outsider to help you. And increasingly I find that businesses are put under a little bit of pressure almost to use digital marketing, particularly if their budgets are limited. So things like using social media, making better use of their website, marketing automation. But quite often we forget as business owners that some of what I would call the older marketing methods, such as well-targeted direct mail or print advertising, can be just as effective in certain circumstances, sometimes a lot more effective if you think about your planning and your execution and get that right. So first thing I'd ask you to do is have a little think for me and jot down on a piece of paper in front of you what I would call your war story. I was just talking to Caroline before we started about her experience of using a creative agency, and did the agency really get it? So sometimes people say to me, well, I spent a fortune on this and it never worked, and they get cross about that, or I didn't get what I really needed to grow my business in the future, so the agency provided what I needed now, but my business has grown and it's no longer suitable or fit for purpose. Or else you'll get the somebody recommended this chap in London story and off they go. So we have to be a little bit careful, and we have to be very focused when we're using agencies about what we want. So just note down an example that you can think of where you've briefed a creative or somebody to do a website for you and you felt you didn't really get value for money, and I'll come back to that. So hopefully you've got some memories that you can make a note of, and we can come back to those at questions later. Put a quote in here from a guy you may have heard of. He's quite famous in the advertising world, called David Ogilvy, and a little quote from a book that is a fantastic read, even though it is a little bit dated now, and you can read for yourself. He says, I don't regard advertising entertainment or as an art form, but as a medium of information. And when I write an advert, I don't want you to tell me that you find it creative. I want you to find it interesting so that you go out and you buy the product. So whatever you do with your creative work, it's got to work for you. It's got to grow your business. It's got to increase your sales. And I've worked in various larger companies as part of a marketing team, and always on my accountability at the end of the year when I sat down with my line manager would be three things. Have I been responsible for increasing sales for the business? Have I increased the profitability of my responsible products and services? And the third one tended to be increasing the share of the market. For a lot of SMEs, we don't really work on share of market because we're not sure how to measure it. But certainly increasing sales and increasing profit, finding those profitable customers, is the most important thing we should be focusing on with our marketing. So if you have a formal written down sales and marketing plan to help you focus and to help you get the best out of creatives, that's really useful. I was speaking with one of the managers at a high street bank a couple of years ago who managed businesses that were between 5 and 25 million turnover, so some quite large, chunky businesses. And he told me that he thinks only about 1 in 5, about 20% of those customers, even the larger ones, had a formal plan in place. But when you asked him whether they were the ones that were moving forward and growing their business or not, he said, come to think of it, there is a really good correlation, a really good fit between those that do have a formal plan and those that don't. And the ones that do tend to be doing better because they're more focused on what they're trying to achieve. So let's have a think then. Why would we use a third party in our business? After all, they might not know anything about your business and they haven't got the knowledge that you have. So take a minute or two just to write down a couple of reasons you can think of. That's only there so I can have a glass of water, by the way. Keep me occupied while you're writing. So here we go. These are some of the things that I think we should consider. And I'm not going to talk through all of them because you're all perfectly capable of reading through them for yourself. But the point I'd like to make is these things should all be considered. The tendency we have as small business owners is that we tend to follow the herd. We do what our competition does because we've always done it and we feel comfortable doing that. Or we ask around our mates at our network group, occasionally even our mates down the pub. And that means that sometimes we make mistakes. So this is a list of things that you should go through, and they might not be applicable to you, but just spending time to think before you act can really help here. So you'd be looking for expertise and technical know-how, probably that you haven't got in your own business, and you'll be thinking about somebody who's going to be objective, and it's going to relieve the time pressure on you. When you're running a business, you've got so many time pressures. Sometimes it's good to hand over a project to someone else. And certainly I've learned by past mistakes, and I always try and hire the best I can afford. They're just quicker at it, they're better at it, I get a better result. So I've changed the way I do things from trying to do everything myself to trying to find an expert to help me. But there are cons as well. Sometimes you have to fit in with their time deadlines. There could be confidentiality issues of dealing with several businesses like yours. And if you are a small business, sometimes if you go to a larger agency, you're not very important to them. That's just the reality of business life if you're a small account. So that's something to consider. So having gone through that list of pros and cons, you'll have made a decision whether to go for outside help or whether to go it alone and do it yourself. So the next step, if you want to go ahead, is to actually select the particular agency that you want to work with. And you may have had ways of selecting agencies in the past that might have made a good decision that you think was fantastic, or you might have regretted it. So considering which agency has the best fit for your business is quite important. There's a apocryphal story, I'm really not sure it's true, but there are some large sports teams in Worcester, and they have large marketing departments, and there also happen to be 2 large creative agencies in Worcester, which is where I live. And the story goes that they flip-flop between one and the other depending on who in the marketing team at the sports team is going out with whoever it is at the creative agency. I'm sure that's not really true, but it's not the best way to go about selecting your agency. So here are things that we need to consider on this list. So again, it's another tick list. They may not all apply to you, but some of them will. What we're looking for is a really good fit. So there isn't a right or wrong answer. This is going to be absolutely unique to your business, who you get on with and who you feel has the right skills for you. Occasionally, people will deliberately select an agency with skill sets that are applicable, but that haven't worked within their industry before, because the danger is if you use somebody that's done lots of businesses like yours, so for example, lots of accountancy companies or lawyers or manufacturing businesses, what they trot out to you is sometimes what they've used for somebody else, or a variation of what they've used for somebody else, which may well work, but it isn't a fresh approach. So very occasionally people will look for specialist skills, but someone who hasn't worked in that industry, because they feel that they want a fresh start and they do deliberately want to look different. So think about what exactly you want. Think about your skills in-house. What skills are you well covered for that you could easily do yourself? what skills do the agency need to bring to the table. An indication of you're on the right track might be to look at who your competitors use, but don't be guided exactly by that. Some people choose an agency because they want a certain kudos, so they might want a big London agency, or they might want a big Birmingham agency because they feel that gives their company some gravitas, if you like, in how they're doing it. But you've got to have a good rapport, and you're aiming for a long-term relationship. To get the best out of any agency, longer term is usually better than a short-term quick fix. So we've had a little think about who we want to talk to. We've made a short list. The next step is the most important step, and this is to actually give your agency a good brief, relevant information that really helps them understand exactly what you're trying to achieve. So you should have a process, preferably a written down process for this, with steps that you can take to make sure that there's very little room for miscommunication between you and the agency. Remember, they're coming into your business as visitors. They're not there all the time. They don't know your history. They don't know your ambitions. They are starting with a blank sheet of paper. And it's my opinion that 80% of creative projects fail. It's why we come back to the war stories of things that go wrong, usually because they were given a poor brief in the first place. So if we have a better briefing process, we allow them to be creative and to produce the best work that they're capable for, that's actually tailored to the needs of your business. Your business is unique. So the more information and help you give them, the better the job they will do. And sometimes we fail, not because we haven't given the brief, but we're actually too prescriptive and too literal. There's a lottery business in Birmingham that we have worked with, and their lottery costs £1 to enter. It's a charitable lottery. And when the main national lottery increased their prices, they thought they should be making a big thing of this. It's only £1, it's still only £1. But they were so prescriptive in the way they briefed the agency, and they said every advert has to have a £1 coin on it somewhere, and it has to look like this, that really they were limiting what that creative agency could produce, and they weren't very happy, and I'm sure the agency weren't either. On the other hand, you can go the other way, be far too creative and let them have too wide a brief, and these results in the adverts that I haven't got an example of because I can't remember the brand name of the advert. So it's getting the balance right, giving them some freedom to be creative, but giving them a very specific brief about which customers you want to talk to and what your selling process is. And if you fail to do that, they're going to be in the dark. They're going to make assumptions, and assumptions might be right, but they might not. So be careful about that. So then we get to actually giving the brief, and I absolutely recommend you sit down face to face. There's nothing like face-to-face communication, which is why it can be a bit difficult when I'm on the microphone to you now, because I can't see how you're responding to me as I'm going through this. But face-to-face is best if you can. Give your brief verbally. Try not to hand them a marketing plan and say, off you go. So what are we going to include? Well, remember, we've got to come back to our overall objectives. How are we trying to grow our business? Which customers do we think are the best ones for us? And then you'll have a list of specifics. So, for example, if you think about Coca-Cola and you think about their advertising, whether it's on a poster, whether it's on a screen, whether it's on social media, the red colour on the Coke can is always exactly the same red. And they pay a lot of money to make sure that it is always exactly the same red. It has the same, what we call Pantone reference. So if that's important to you, if you want to look consistent, you have to tell the agency that it has to work, whether I'm in print or on digital or wherever else you want to use your branding. It's got to be consistent. If I pick out an example of one of my charity clients recently I went to, it's an arts organisation, and they had a lot of very diverse membership organisation. They had a lot of diverse members, and they had used on their website, I counted over 30 fonts and different colours and different boxes for this, that and the other, which was meant to look interesting and exciting, but actually just didn't look very professional. So they've gone away to rethink that, and they're working on that at the moment. And likes and dislikes, things that you personally really like, that's going to tick the box for you. Tell them. And equally, tell them what you don't like, because sometimes what you don't like is just as valuable to an agency as what you do like. You have a company personality, particularly if you're a small business, so let them know what your personality is. Let them know what your ethos is. What are your values in business? And then that will really help them make the best of the brief that you give them. So what else to include? Be very specific about the response that you want. It's like giving somebody a brief and not telling them what the answer is like expecting somebody to sit an exam paper without ever giving them a practice or a mock paper to do first. And that will make everybody nervous, and you'll get a much better answer from them if you tell them exactly what you're marking them on and what the tick boxes are. So what exactly do you need? What stages are you planning? What's your timing? What are you using your advertising, your website to do? Who do you want to talk to? Where are they? What are they doing when you want to talk to them? Any references or examples that you can give them will really help. If you know what your budget is, share it. If they think it's too small, they'll probably be honest and tell you. I hope they'll be honest and tell you, but tell them, because that's important. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. But sometimes you have to if the budget only allows you to do that. So what are the evaluation criteria that you're looking for? Be very specific, be as specific as you can. During your meeting then, the agency will be taking notes and they will be asking questions, and that's good. The more questions they ask, the more they will get it, in my language. So allow plenty of time. Don't try and rush the process. And agree with them the date and the time for the feedback as you're doing it. They should be taking their own notes and feeding back to you their idea of the brief. So don't hand over your piece of paper. Make sure that they've checked verbally that they've got it. And then the next stage, when you've given your brief, they will go away and think about it, is to think about the feedback. Now, quite often if you're using a creative, the feedback will be several stages. So there'll be a step one concept stage where they come back with perhaps 3 or 4 ideas. The same thing for a website. They might come back with 3 or 4 home pages for you to look at. And then you refine that and you come through to your final example. It's very difficult, because we're human, to get out of the emotional response. And the number of times I sat down in a meeting and an agency's put a beautiful piece of work or a concept in front of you, and the chief exec will say, oh, don't want that yellow, or I can't be doing that, or I really like this, whatever it is. But it is a very emotional first look response, and there's nothing wrong with that, and you should note what it is. But then managing the process and making the right selection depends on being a bit more rational. So get all the emotion out on the table, get it out the way, tell them you like it, you hate it, whatever, that's absolutely fine, but then get into the specifics. So we should have some objective criteria that can be scored. And remember, you've told them this in the brief, what you're going to score them on. And each draft that you see will have pros, it will have things that you like, and it will have cons that you don't like. They're very unlikely to get it absolutely bang on the spot first time. So it's really important that you say, I like this because, and give them some very specific things about it, or I don't like this because. So you still allow the gut feel emotional reaction, but try and give them some specific things to go away with as well. One of the challenges I've got at the moment, again, one of my charity clients, they wanted to tweak their logo. They were really reasonably happy with it. They didn't want a total rebrand, but they wanted to infuse some new life into it. The two organisations coming together, and they wanted something a little bit different. And they were wedded to the idea that it'd be lovely to use some of the local students at the art college to give them some ideas. And they may get some really fantastic responses from that. But my gut feeling with that is, yes, you might get some really lovely things that work on paper, but they might not work in print, they might not work on digital, they might not be exactly right, because students will have not had that work experience, that practical experience of what works for an SME. So I said I'll go back to them and I'll help them with that, manage that meeting so that we get both the rational response and the emotional response. And it may be that we then take second stage out to a professional creative agency instead of going back to the students and asking them to finish it. So have a structure, follow your structure, and be as specific as you can. Sometimes, we're Brits and we don't like talking about money, and we don't like talking about deadlines, and particularly if you're a lady like me, you don't like to look as if you're too business-like a male in your approach, so we get a bit wishy-washy when it comes to payment terms and completion, and that is a real no-no. We can go wrong just because we don't like talking about money. So we should again have some steps in place to make sure that things are agreed at the outset, so everybody's absolutely clear what's required. And some of the things that can go wrong are copyright. If you get somebody to design something for you or create a new website or send out a press release on your behalf, who owns that intellectual property? Who owns the text? Who owns the images? Who owns the branding? And unless you have paid for that, until you've paid for that, it doesn't belong to the company. But once you've paid the agency, that should then be agreed that the copyright for that work now belongs to your company and not to the creative agency. They might want to use it in a case study or a testimonial. They can ask for permission for that, and that might be absolutely fine. It might be good advertising for you. But make sure it's agreed. Don't just talk about it. Get it out on the table. What are we going to do? What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? Something that can go wrong with a website is that you need to have ownership of your own domain names. And it's very easy for a good website agency to say, oh, I'll take care of all of that. We'll make sure we buy domain names for you and we'll keep a record of them, and that's fine. But if that company then go out of business, or they stop trading for some other reason, or you move, or your requirements change, it's much, much better and safer to have that domain name registered. It's as your business property, you own it, rather than let the agency do it. And they might be doing it for all the right reasons to keep things simple for you, but it's safer if you also know what's going on. So we're thinking we're going to be long-term relationships. We're hoping there aren't going to be any problems, but it is always best to talk detail and make sure you've got everything tied up. And lastly, I want to talk about a competitive selection process, or what a lot of people call pitches, where you invite into your business 2 or 3 or sometimes more agencies to put a tender in or to do a competitive pitch. And there are some good reasons for doing this, but there are some drawbacks too. So if you are going to go down that route, or if your certain businesses or county councils have to go down this route, choose your number carefully. You want to give each agency enough time to show fairly and properly what they can do. So you need enough time for the briefing. I would always tell them in advance that they're in a competitive tender process. And you cannot pinch their ideas. So if somebody brings something to you in a competitive pitch and you decide for whatever reason to go with a different agency because they have a better fit, but you like the idea they presented with you with, that idea belongs to the agency, not to you. So again, it's a good practice to pay a goodwill gesture for their time and effort. You might even agree beforehand that they will get a fee for doing the pitch. And it just clarifies the process. It means you don't have any arguments with them later, and everybody knows where they stand. So not to say have a competitive pitch or don't have one, but if you do, you can get into difficulties, and again, it's best to think about what the rules are before you start and share those with the agencies. And that's really all I wanted to say. So thanks for listening. And has anybody any questions, perhaps things they've jotted down earlier?
Great, thank you so much, Jill, for that presentation. We've got a few questions coming through. The first one from Laura is, if you have used an agency for a while and you are not happy with them, what steps should we now take?
This is actually quite typical in that you can select somebody you feel very comfortable with, and initially you do a great job. But guess what? We're all human, and we can actually get into a little bit of complacency. So I would say, remembering our rule that if something's going wrong in the relationship and we're not getting good work out of the agency, it's probably our fault. It's probably because we haven't given them a good brief. So go back to the brief that you gave them, or perhaps start from scratch and think again, if I were working from scratch with this agency, what do they need to know about my business? And it could be that the business needs have changed, that you've grown, that the customers you're now targeting are entirely different from the ones when you started 2 or 3 years ago. So go back and think about the process afresh. and give them the opportunity to fix things. Quite often we get very emotional in business, particularly with small business, our business, we get very emotional about it, we own it, and we take ourselves off in a fit of temper and we think somebody else is going to do a better job, and they may well do a better job. But usually somebody who knows you, who you trust, who's understood your business and seen it grow, if you can give them a better brief, you might well get better work out of them. So don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater here. Give them another opportunity to rectify things. Does that help?
Thank you very much. Next question from Chris. If I have a project to create a new brochure that is already underway with an external agency, is it too late to start using some of the tips that you have given us today?
That will depend on your time and probably on the relationship that you've agreed with them. If they're working to a fixed budget, if you want to go back and rebrief them, they will probably need more time to work on it. So yes, certainly, if you realise you've made a mistake or you might not be getting the best out of them, do please go back to them and talk to them about it. But be aware that if they've already worked on that project, it's only reasonable for them to have some time associated with that. So again, be very clear about what you're paying for. If you think you can do a better job by giving a better brief, absolutely do it. I would do it all the time. But make sure you manage the relationship and manage the expectations.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I'm an SME with a very limited budget. What is the best marketing tools that I can use?
This is something that I get asked all the time, and it is very difficult when you're starting out because you've got so many calls on your budget. So I would always say get your finances in place first before you even think about marketing. Finances first, and then sales and marketing. But just be a little bit wary. There are a bit like estate agents and bank managers and politicians. There are people in our business that don't do sales and marketing creatives a good turn. And there are people out there that will tell you whatever they think you want to hear in order to get a sale. So think very carefully about who you're asking for advice. If you're going to buy a pension scheme, for example, you might be better off going to an independent financial advisor who has hundreds and hundreds of pension schemes to offer you, and they can pick the right one for you. So they are completely independent of the parcel that they wrap your pension in, if you like. And marketing's a little bit like that. If you talk to somebody who finds that social media is very effective for them, they will tell you should be on social media. If you talk to somebody who gets good results through a nice website, they will tell you to spend money on the website or SEO, whatever. But just think about who that message is coming from and be a little bit cautious. Somebody who's entirely independent and can choose lots of different methods to help you with your marketing might come up with a better solution. And it's not the case, sadly, that social media is free because you have to spend a lot of time getting it to work. You should have a plan and a strategy, things like social media, just as you would if you were planning a direct mail campaign or an advert with a newspaper. And what people tend to miss out, I think, is the thinking time and the planning time. So if you think about, I've got a mark out of 10 for where I spend my time, 8 out of 10, 80% of your time should be spent thinking and planning about what you're trying to achieve. And the last 20% is, how do I do that? What's the best medium to do that? What's the best process? What's the best platform on social media? Because you certainly can't do all of them. So yes, when you've got a limited budget, you have to be almost more careful about where you spend it. And you have to try and take the best educated guess that you can about where your customers are going to be and what's going to excite them. But don't forget, it's not just about excitement, it's also about we want them to do something practical. We want them to buy from you. And quite often on social media, those selling messages sound awful because there's no context, you don't see people face to face. So don't make the assumption that because you can do something that just takes your time, that it's free. It might not be free, it might be very frustrating, it might take you a long time to get it to work. So sometimes having an outsider, someone you trust in your business, it could be a marketing person, it could be your bank manager, it could be your accountant, it could be somebody, a professional advisor who you trust, business coach. They will often have a clearer view here, and they'll be able to help you to a certain extent with the planning process and the thinking. And we tend to rush in because we get all excited about the implementation and don't think things through first. So take that time. You owe it to yourself to spend your budget wisely. So don't just take the opinion of the man down the pub or in your network group. Try and think about what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you very much. That leads nicely on to the next question, which is the best social media platform for me to use in my business?
Again, I probably have touched a little bit on this. There are thousands of social media platforms out there, and some of them you will instinctively like and feel comfortable on, and some of them you will instinctively dislike. So it's no use pushing water uphill. If you hate Twitter and just get confused by it, there's no point trying to use Twitter. But Twitter can in certain circumstances be very effective. So if you're, for example, I know of an ICT company that sells some very specialized software products, and they get all their business through Twitter because they're talking to other techies who also love Twitter. If you're B2C, obviously Facebook is probably going to be better for you than a B2B company where LinkedIn might be preferable. But bear in mind that you can't do them all. So think about what the platform is doing, who is it talking to, what are they doing when they're using it? Are they sociable? Are they in business mode? What time of day? And try and pick ones that you think have a good fit with when people are deciding, making their selection about who to use. So don't beat yourself up. You can't do them all. Pick 2 or 3 and concentrate on doing a good job with those.
Thank you very much. Next question. Do you think telesales is an effective sales route? Question from Peter.
You probably know the answer to this, Peter, already. Telesales can be very effective in certain circumstances. And again, it depends what you're selling. If you're selling something that's quite low value and people don't spend a lot of time making the decision, telesales can be effective. But it has to be done properly. So again, think about who you employ to do it. Do they really know what they're doing? Are they going to be careful with data protection? You can do more harm than good phoning people who don't want to be telephoned, and you have to be very careful about the data management. So yes, don't rule it out. It might be very effective. Certainly if you've got a higher value product or something a bit more bespoke, telesales can be a very important part of the mix of things you'll be doing to approach your customers. And you've got to think about when you use it in the process, at the beginning, is it at the end, and who you're talking to. But it can be used very effectively to warm up customers gradually. So it's not a hard sell, it's a getting to know you sort of conversation. So for higher value items, telesales certainly has a price. It doesn't all have to be push that has the really bad reputation. So depending on how it's done, telesales can be effective.
Thank you very much. I think those are all your questions. So thank you again, Jill, for joining us today.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I will be sending out a copy of the presentation and Jill's contact details out to everybody later on today. So I'd just like to thank you all for joining us, and I hope that you make our Lunch and Learn webinars a regular slot in your calendar. They're every Tuesday at 12:30. Jill and I hope you all have a great afternoon, and thank you again for joining us.
Goodbye.
Bye.